Greetings ladies and gentlemen, Adrian here. Welcome back to the channel and to my review of Guild Wars 2's second expansion, Path of Fire. Released 22nd September, the expansion takes players to Ilona, the Crystal Desert, to continue the game's main story through 5 new maps with a bunch of new content and features as well. We'll be taking a look at all the new additions in depth with my final thoughts at the very end. And if you haven't watched my review for Vanilla Guild Wars 2, you can check it out in the info bar at the top or in the description box below. Now, let's begin. One of the biggest new features of the Path of Fire expansion is the introduction of mounts to the game. For 5 years, Guild Wars 2 didn't have a need for a mount system. The core game had sufficient waypoints littered throughout the various maps to help players get around, and with the Heart of Thorns expansion, gliding was introduced to complement the multi-tiered layers of the Heart of Maguma maps. So with mounts now in the game, how does that affect your gameplay? There are 4 base mounts that players can obtain by simply following the new Path of Fire personal story through Ilona. Each comes with its own mastery system that you'll definitely want to fill out as they unlock new abilities for your mounts. They can also be used to start fights through an engaged skill that does different things such as offering boons or pulling mobs depending on which one you're using. Let's go through them all. First up is the Raptor, which players will get at the very beginning of the Path of Fire story. Raptors are probably the most popular mount in-game now that Path of Fire has been out for a few weeks. Raptors are the easiest to obtain, and once its mastery has reached tier 3, can cross far distances with its canyon jumping ability. I myself use the Raptor to cover even ground faster, as that long jump is super awesome for catching up to someone or something on the landscape. Up next is the Springer, a hybrid between a rabbit and a kangaroo, which excels at high jumps, especially when you tear him up. The Springer, in my experience, is the most useful mount out of the 4 base mounts by sheer virtue of how much you can accomplish where you previously struggled both in the Crystal Desert or in Vanilla or Heart of Thorn regions. Hint hint, jumping puzzles and anything jumping related. I am, and I can only speak for myself here, terrible at jumping puzzles, and the tiered up Springer takes a lot of that grief away. Unfortunately, it's also one of the slowest mounts, which means I never use it for travel and must dismount from something else to remount the Springer for jumps before dismounting again to something faster. Kinda clunky, but a necessary compromise, or no one will use anything else but the Springer. Next in line is the Skimmer. This manta ray looking thing excels at traveling over water, for which it gains a speed boost. It can also travel over quicksand, which is a brand new thing in some of the Crystal Desert maps found in the Elon Riverlands onward. Walking into it or on another mount will simply dismount you and drain your health. Besides that, I haven't really used it a lot compared to the other mounts, which makes it the least useful for me. It's pretty slow on land, and there's another mount out there that can travel over water or quicksand just as well. So I'd have to say that the Skimmer, unfortunately, doesn't do a whole lot for me. It kind of feels like it was only introduced for players to access certain areas of the new maps where there are either mastery point insights, and the only reason you'll need the Skimmer is because it will be a requirement in the Path of Fire main story. But I won't discount the Skimmer just yet, as there are some regions in Corteria that has a ton of water travel, such as in the Straits of Devastation or around Ore, where the Skimmer can come in handy for playing on alts. And rounding up the base Path of Fire mounts is the Jackal. The Jackal is something I consider as the premium mount in Path of Fire. It costs 25 gold to obtain, and its unique ability is being able to use sand portals found in areas on the map that either leads to shortcuts or new hidden places that no other mount can get to. I've explored a lot of these on Jackal and have to say that you'll probably want it if you're a completionist and want all the mastery insights, the vistas, the hero points, and popping open loot chests to get drops as well. Another plus the Jackal has is that it looks frigging amazing, and in my opinion, it is the best looking mount out there, and the closest thing you have to riding a direwolf in Guild Wars 2, if that's your thing. Its ability is also pretty great for avoiding attacks, and you can waltz through mob clusters with ease. However, it's not exactly high up the picking order for mounts I find most useful at the moment, especially for Corteria maps. The Jackal clocks in decent speeds and will be handy for running through highly dense mob areas, but besides that, it has no other use since sand portals are only a thing in the new regions. Of course, all these could change in future content updates and maps, so keep in mind that my opinions on their usefulness are based on the content and maps that we have available right now. And finally, we get to the fifth mount, the Griffin. Griffins are a hidden achievement mount, which ironically isn't a secret anymore, now that almost everyone with enough gold has one. Once you've completed the main Path of Fire story, the path to unlock the Griffin begins, and it's a fairly long scavenger hunt which also involves spending 250 gold in order to unlock the mount. Expensive, yes, but is it worth the effort? I've been using my Griffin a lot since getting it, and I must say yes. The ability to glide faster and farther than anything before is welcomed, especially when you take off from high places. And just to clarify, no, it's not a flying mount. Sure, there are videos out there that shows the Griffin being airborne for ages. That's largely because in high areas such as Verdant Brink, which has many map levels, the Griffin excels as it leverages height in order to glide continuously and at a fast pace as well. All-round, Griffins are excellent mounts in both Corteria and in the Path of Fire maps. They can maneuver just about anything, from pesky jumps to crossing lakes or even crossing an entire map. Now that you know a lot more about the Path of Fire mounts, let's sum it all up and analyze them as a feature in Guild Wars 2. Have mounts improved the game, and what exactly has it done besides just being another mode of player transportation? Well, firstly, of course mounts have improved Guild Wars 2, and in a pretty big way. Traveling around maps is now made a lot more fun thanks to the fluid controls of mounts and their skills as well. In a way, mounts are a catch-up mechanic too. Players now have the ability to complete the core maps faster, navigate through Heart of Thorns without too much hassle, and use each of the mount's abilities to offer new ways to play and engage in fights, from world boss encounters, and so much more. I can't wait to see how we'll be using our mounts in future content. So, what about you? Which mount is the most and least useful in your adventures? Get the conversation going in the comments section below. Moving on, let's talk about all the new PvE content in the expansion. Yes, the main story continues, but that warrants its own talking point, so what else is there to do in Path of Fire? The answer is plenty, my friends. Path of Fire introduces 5 new maps, and there's a good chunk of content on each, beginning with the return of tasks, or heart quests. Tasks were not part of the Heart of Thorns expansion, but slowly made its way back into the game all throughout the Season 3 maps, so it's good to see it back in Path of Fire. These tasks add a lot more flavor to your PvE experience, as they largely involve you helping the cultured people of Alona, who offers some insight into the zone story and how things have been going since Balthazar and his minions passed through. They are also repeatable and will be necessary to complete in order to purchase important collection items, karma turn-ins, and stuff like that. We'll talk about that later. Another big PvE feature introduced with the expansion are bounties. In major hubs on all the maps, players will find bounty boards with bounties to pick. You can pick them up and make your way to the target location to take on champion level mobs for rewards. I made the mistake of thinking I could do them in a small group of 2 to 3, but learned the hard way that these champion fights can get pretty difficult and you'll definitely want a bigger group. What's cool about these bounties are the fight mechanics. Every bounty has its own unique fight mechanic that changes from day to day at random. And then there's the legendary bounties, which are a blast to participate in, requiring a lot of players. If you're a casual or solo player who want to check this out, don't worry, simply open up your looking for group tool and look under the PoF maps. Even today, there's lots of folks still advertising bounty runs, so don't feel afraid to join the bounty train for experience points, achievements, and all that good stuff. They'll take you all over the place too, and you'll get to experience some of the new creature designs, and hey, it always feels great taking down a boss with a bunch of other players for the large chest at the end. And once you're done with those, there's brand new adventures scattered around Path of Fire to discover, and some of them even involves mounts. And speaking of mounts, I just love some of the new mini content that involves you using your mount. In the city of Amnoon, for example, you can take part in raptor races, which happens elsewhere too. And it's just something you can do to break the usual questing monotony. Dynamic events are still a thing, and there's even micro mini gambling games like Sandstorm, where players gamble away a certain amount of ectoplasm and gold for cards. I mean, these things are optional to indulge in, and I think it's great that it's there. It gives a lot more life to places like Amnoon, where we know we are in an area of civilization, and things like the Casino Blitz just fits right in. It's a pretty good contrast from the last expansion being surrounded by jungle and wildlife all the time. Regardless of what your playstyle is, there's a bunch of content to get through if you go looking for it, and we haven't even talked about the story, which we'll do right now. Now, before I go on about the story, I'm gonna have to insert an obligatory spoiler warning here. Yes, there will be spoilers ahead. I won't divulge too much information, but feel free to skip ahead to the next point if you absolutely don't want to know anything about the story in Path of Fire. Now that's out of the way, let's talk some story. So, towards the end of Season 3, we know that Balthazar is back among us and he wants to take on Kralkatorrik. This is where the story starts, and we quickly find our way to the Crystal Desert to meet up with members of Dragon's Watch, our guild that's now tasked with tracking down Balthazar and repairing some of the damage he's done to the people of Elona. There's 13 personal chapters in Path of Fire, which will take you organically through the 5 maps, all the while picking up the mounts in chronological order because some of them will be necessary for certain chapters. As you'd expect, there's plenty of good writing in this Path of Fire chapters, and that largely comes down to the themes found within the Path of Fire plot. Like, are we actually fighting a god? And what does that mean for humans that worship him? And will that affect our group's dynamic considering we have someone that's really pious? What's also great is that it's not all about god hunting from start to end. In fact, very early on, you'll also be introduced to a centralized Elona region story involving the people of Amnun and the Crystal Desert. Being caught in this turmoil, there's a lot of politics going on, as some want to be independent, while others want to devote themselves to Palawa Joko, who some believe can save Elona from Balthazar with his undead army. Of course, that means that there's some choices here for the player, and these narrative beats are an excellent addition to an already story-heavy expansion. I really like how most of the things on the landscape, from dynamic events to the main story itself, explores these themes in ways that offers new players a lot of insight into the history of this particular region. Who are its peoples? What are their beliefs, their cultures? And considering there are a lot of us here who've never played the original Guild Wars, it's great. So how good exactly is the story in this expansion? The pacing between the chapters for starters is pretty good, as it allows you to move onward from location to location, seeing new things on the new maps on the way to where your chapter instance begins. And within these 13 chapters, there's a good balance of cinematic cutscenes and voiced dialogue, which by the way, seems to have been increased in volume, which is great. Are there big epic moments to expect? Yes, there's totally an oh my god moment somewhere in the middle building up to the climax that's just so unexpected, and it adds a lot more purpose and it absolutely justifies the climax of the story. Path of Fire also ties up a lot of loose ends and introduces a couple of key happenings that further fleshes out our story with Aurene. And that's all I'm saying about that. And because it's Guild Wars 2, you can expect challenging boss fights every few chapters. There are a few which introduces new mechanics, while others rely on past formulas that can be a hit or miss, and we'll talk about those later as well. But some of the best moments I've had are definitely in story instances that involves me doing things I've never done before in Guild Wars 2, or in other MMOs for that matter. In one instance, the key to completing the story chapter was to gather up my own little army of mummies and command them to attack mobs in ranged or melee without getting involved in the fighting myself for the achievement. It's such a cool moment to experience, and really something I've not seen in any MMO main story so far. It's interesting and out of the box, and that's just one example of what you can expect in the new expansion. Moving on, characters are a big part of Guild Wars 2's storytelling. In Path of Fire, Ridlock, Casimir, and Canuck make up the bulk of the Dragon Watch members that join your quest in Elona. While Taimi isn't around, the two of you will regularly share updates via voice comms. Unfortunately, that's about it. And while the banter and dialogue in the story scenes between the commander and the 4 Dragon Watch members is well written, I can't help but feel like there's a void, and I'd often anticipate other members arriving in between chapters, like Bram, who we've not heard from since our last bust-up, or Rox. It's a far cry from the Heart of Thorns expansion, where the cast of characters was a lot bigger and it truly felt like an epic expansion ensemble where everyone had a part to play and it all fit. To fill in the blanks, Path of Fire does introduce new characters in areas where it's necessary for the plot, like members of the Council of Amnoon, some of Palawa Joko's officers near the end, or members of the Sun Spear that are scattered throughout the Crystal Desert. To me at least, these characters only fill a specific role for specific chapters, and unfortunately they're not memorable enough, and even now I can't recall most of their names. But I'm still happy with what we've got from the characters that joined us for most of this expansion, and ultimately, the story benefits with a smaller cast because a lot of the focus will be on you, Commander. The story's got it all: lighthearted banter, heavy emotional stuff, dragon family issues, and adrenaline-pumping fights with a good amount of payoff. It's all I can ask for in an MMO story, and I definitely think it's worth playing through. Number 4, let's talk aesthetics, beginning with the new Path of Fire maps. The biggest change about the new expansion maps from Season 3 and Heart of Thorns is exactly that. They're huge. Of course, it makes sense that there's so much ground to cover, as we now have mounts to accompany us on our journey. Aesthetically speaking, the 5 new maps, which are the Crystal Oasis, Desert Highlands, Elon Riverlands, the Desolation, and the Domain of Vabi, are among my favorites in the game. It's hard not to admire the environment designs: the deserts, the hidden oasis, the snowy peaks, and the clusters of crystal rock formation from the not-too-distant past. It paints a glorious picture of biomes that works incredibly well, and it makes viewing vistas a real pleasure. The maps also feel a lot more traditional, considering it doesn't have many different layers like the Heart of Thorns maps do, and I prefer that. But what I'm really impressed with are the new designs for creatures and mobs. They look amazing, especially stuff like the Hydra, Sand Sharks, Choya, and the Awakened, which is such a relief that the devs did not recycle assets and just pull up Risen-type designs from ore. There's just so much diversity when it comes to creature design, and I haven't even begun talking about the new armor designs as well. And finally, I have to talk about the new music. Path of Fire, as with the previous expansion, comes fully equipped with new soundtracks, themes, and ambient music. And it's really good stuff. It's thematic, it's cultural, and it incorporates vibey percussions, which makes you feel that you are venturing into desert parts unknown. I just wish that the login screen music would have been a little more upbeat. And I'm not saying that the main Path of Fire theme is bad. No, in fact, I love it. It's just that I've always associated the login screen music to be really upbeat and uplifting, thanks to hearing the Heart of Thorns theme for the past few years, and it was really great for setting the mood. It's different times now, I guess, but overall, I can't complain about aesthetics and music this expansion. It's pretty top-notch. And finally, we get to the last feature of the Path of Fire expansion, the brand new elite specializations for all classes. Yes, every class gets a brand new elite spec, which requires 250 hero points to fully unlock, granting your class access to a new weapon with accompanying skills, traits, and a new specialization collection as well if you want an ascended level weapon. The first couple of days after launch, I stayed away from checking out the new elite specs on my main Guardian. I was intimidated by it. I mean, I've spent a lot of time getting used to the last elite spec, which was the Dragon Hunter, which I absolutely loved. So the thought of having to readjust my rotations and build was kinda daunting. But once I started getting into the new Firebrand spec for Guardians, I haven't gone back. I can only speak for the class I play, and I'm so liking the Firebrand. It's versatile, it's situational, and more importantly, offers me alternative ways to play my class across PvE and PvP, which should be true for all classes across the board. The new skill animations are excellent, and I'm pretty stoked to see what the future holds for classes. Of course, with the new specs comes the issue of balance, and from looking at the forums and Reddit, or even reading map chat in PvP, not everyone's happy with where their classes are at, and balancing is a long-term act. But from a neutral's perspective, I can and I am appreciating the added diversity of how I can now build and play my character's class. So, now that I'm done reviewing the main features of the Path of Fire expansion, are there any negatives or cons that I've experienced while playing through the expansion? There's some, beginning with some of the main story boss fights. While most of them get your adrenaline pumping and can be a fun challenge, some are just a little too predictable and reuses fight mechanics that we've already seen from past content. For example, in one story boss fight, you jump in for the first time not knowing what's going on. And then you start to see the blueprint of here's the mechanics for phase 1, remember it. Here's the mechanics for phase 2, remember it. And in phase 3, we'll combine all 3 and that's how you take down the boss. And that's the kind of fight that makes me go meh. And just to be clear, it's not the fight itself I take issue with. It's the underlying mechanics and the whole 3-phase thing. I think it's time we tried something else, something we as players have not experienced before, which would be cool. And then there are some boss fights that are just downright bizarre to figure out, like the Soul Eater in another story chapter that frankly is super unforgiving and you'll definitely struggle with it if you end up bringing in the wrong build. There's no changing gears and builds, there's no repairing, so I ended up cheesing it. That's a challenging fight, but the placement and reason for it being there doesn't make any sense considering the one fight prior to that was more significant in the story and yet was one of the easiest boss fights in the expansion. Go figure. One decision that I'm not a big fan of is that the tasks in the Path of Fire maps are all repeatable. Actually, it's more like a reset. Doing them once only unlocks the vendor, which by the way sells pretty important stuff, especially if you're after the achievements and collections, until the next daily reset. Again, I'm not a big fan of that. I can sort of see why it's there. It's like a mini time sink and it kind of offers some sort of replayability maybe, but not for me. You can get most of them done in under 10 minutes, and some hearts are actually kind of fun to do, while others are kind of boring and you really don't want to be doing them over and over again in a span of a few short days just to pick up that one item that you just need to complete a collection for the Griffin mount. I found it inconvenient, but that's just me. Besides those 3 experiences, there isn't much else I can find fault with in Path of Fire, and I was actively looking for them for the review. Launch went smoothly. Yes, I was having internet issues, but that's normal I guess for me. My ping spikes a lot more since Path of Fire, but really that's because of where I am in the world. Other than 1 or 2 server downtimes during launch weekend, there isn't a lot that went wrong. And I thoroughly enjoyed the content in Path of Fire, so let's go to the verdict. Is Guild Wars 2 Path of Fire worth the money? Absolutely. The standard edition for the expansion will cost you $29.99 US and comes with a level 80 character boost. There's more than enough content here that gives you value for money. You'll be getting mounts for starters, a huge addition to the game that will drastically improve the way you travel and play in Guild Wars 2. The story continues and it's excellent. There's a lot of things to do in the Crystal Desert, and the great thing is, especially if you're a returning or a new player, you already know there's no subscription, and Guild Wars 2 is great at not leaving players behind. So if you've been away, there's no catching up, there's no grinding for gear just to jump into Path of Fire. You can get started right away, which is such a huge plus. And that wraps up my review of Guild Wars 2 Path of Fire. If you want to jump right in, I've got you covered. You can grab the expansion using the affiliate link in the description box below, which will support my channel, and I truly appreciate your support. Also, feel free to share your own experiences in the expansion in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you. Like the video if you liked it, and hey, feel free to subscribe to my channel for more MMO content. Once again, I'm Adrian, and I thank you for watching.